Good morning. It's so great to see all of your shining bright faces. Generally speaking, my job is to help very, very large companies to assimilate diverse ideation. So to take all of you thought leaders and disruptors and integrate you successfully into these very big companies that rely upon you for innovation. Unfortunately, I will tell you, not always successfully, in the sense that although very large companies really want and need people like you, they are often not able to assimilate them for various different reasons. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information. I'm going to share my story with you. And I'm also going to give some suggestions about what each of us in the audience can do to move the needle on connecting diversity, but most importantly, inclusion as an economic imperative. Will you help me? Okay, thank you. All right, so first of all, I want to share with you that although my mission is very much related to diversity and inclusion, I'm coming to this experience from the lens of being a woman, right? I'm not a black male, I'm not a Latina, I don't have a significant disability, I don't identify as LGBTQ+, but what I have is a different mind. I have this sort of, crazy, you can't stop me mentality that makes me a great entrepreneur and that helped to fuel my success in terms of being able to create something that I then was able to sell, successfully exit, and then try my hand at a completely different experience in a 300,000 person organization. So, I say that because I've had some very startling realizations lately. So for example, I was running through Central Park, but just prior to that, I had spilled coffee all over the front of my t-shirt. And that turned me into, looking, somewhat cool to looking like, I don't know, a klutz or something. And as I was running along and I passed a cop, I thought, wow, what if you were a black male, or let's make it a black young male, and you had spilled coffee on your t-shirt, and you passed that cop, what kind of a risk might you be running that you, Denise, your biggest worry that day was that you looked like a klutz? So everybody's experience in this audience is going to be different based on your unique diversity. But I'm just going to put out there that anyone who feels that they don't fit in or that they don't belong for any reason has an inclusion issue. And if you have that issue, then the organizations that you're affiliated with also have that issue, because how hard is it to bring your best self to the table if you don't feel like you belong? And I'm going to try to prove that to you today. We'll see if I'm successful. So we can all agree that creativity and innovation require diverse thought. Is there anyone here that thinks that that's not the case? Is there anyone here who thinks that we should all think the same because that's going to propel the world forward? Raise your hand, please. Okay, I agree with you completely and entirely. But what I will say is that diversity is not enough. In fact, the statistics demonstrate that for diverse teams, for example, that it can actually be a problem, not a benefit, if leaders of those teams do not know how to create an environment of inclusion. Why is that? Because if you have a whole bunch of people thinking different ways, and that leader is unable to empower that diverse ideation, it dies. Okay, so I would argue, do we want a diverse slate, for example, for high-level positions? You better believe it. But when those diverse people get there, you better be prepared to provide them with inclusive leadership behaviors so that these people can thrive. That includes me and probably everyone in this audience. So, in my introduction, they were nice enough to mention that I had this achievement in terms of building a practice. I'll tell you a little bit more about that now, as well as in my breakout when I do growth and exit strategy. But when I left Ernst Young, I left because I decided, building a cross-cultural firm was great. I got to travel all over the world. I got to make life better for a lot of people and a lot of companies across culture, but I'm ready to take on the entire diversity agenda. However, I'm not interested in speaking about diversity as a nice to have. What I am interested in is the connection between inclusion and business performance. What I am interested in is demonstrating that diversity and inclusion is an economic imperative, so that no matter what administration we have in office, no matter what our senior leaders may think, they will stand up and take notice, because if they don't, the bottom line is going to suffer. That's my hypothesis, and I built an entire business based on that alone. So I'm normally in a room filled with hundreds of people talking to senior leaders of major organizations to explain to them, innovate or die, inclusion or no diverse ideation. Now, what are we hearing in tech in particular that would lead me to believe that this is an important issue? We are hearing things like, oh, we want to have a diverse slate of candidates. We are hearing things like, we want fresh new ideas, and diversity is our top priority. We're hearing things like, oh, well, you know, obviously we value all perspectives. But what is actually happening? What is actually happening is that the focus on diversity is relatively lip service, in the sense that there's a regulatory approach, there's liability avoidance. You know, we got to worry about the EEOC. You know, yes, we want ideas, but you know, if they come from the top, then those people get a seat at the table and they get listened to, right? And if not at the top, then in an inner circle of people that are connected, not from the manufacturing floor and not from people who don't look, act like they do. And what we're also finding is that diverse teams have leaders who basically don't have the kind of inclusive leadership behaviors that propel innovation. I see an opportunity there, and I'll bet you that you do too. We're going to do a little exercise now, if you don't mind, and bear with me. Although you were told to silence your cell phones, and absolutely please do, but if you wouldn't mind taking out your cell phones, those of you who have them, and I want you to Google Roman numeral watch. And what I'm looking for is images. So whatever the most practical way is for you to Google the images of a Roman numeral watch. And if you could just look up at me once you have, you know, one or a few of them in front of you, so that I know that you found it. Okay, about half of you. The rest of you have slow fingers like me. Okay, I want you to stare at it, just for a few seconds. Stare at the image, please. Okay, now would you turn your phone over and not look at it? Turn your phone over on the table or anywhere else you want to. Okay. Tell me, please, if you don't mind, how many people observed that the number 10 is an X? Raise your hand. Okay. How many people observed that the number 5 is depicted by a V? Raise your hand. Did the rest of you not observe that? Did you not see that the Roman numeral? Interesting. Okay. How many of you saw that the number 4 is represented by IV? Raise your hand. Okay, so it's like an I with a V for number 4. Okay. Now, would you please turn over and look again at your phone? What does the number 4 look like? Four eyes, right? Now, why did I have you diverge from the normal course of action when you're in this kind of a presentation to do that? The answer is because we see what we expect to see, right? So if I'm in a boardroom and I'm the only woman there, if I'm in a senior leadership position and in a meeting where I'm the only woman there, what tends to happen is that my colleagues at that table see what they want to see in me. And they have a certain definition of characteristics, for example, of what a woman is. And I got to tell you, when it comes to senior leadership, it's not that easy, because we have to stand out to be considered a senior leader. but we sure as heck better fit in if we're going to stay there. And fitting in, by the way, it does not mean that we take on the characteristics of most leaders, because most leaders, they have a voice, right? They're pretty assertive. You know, they're pretty commanding in their presence. But what happens when a woman does that? When a woman comes out with kind of a very confident and, assertive voice, what happens to that woman? She is generally seen as overly aggressive and assertive. And so what I'm trying to encourage everyone to do is to see beyond the 10% of what you see. All you see right now is a white woman in a suit, and maybe you've already made a judgment about who I am, that I'm elitist, or that I'm, I don't know, that I rose my way through the top through some, strange means. Maybe you're giving me the benefit of the doubt, but there's 90% of who I am that you don't yet know, and I'm going to share some of it with you. I'm going to share the backstory. Before I get into my own personal story, I want to tell you a little bit about the neuroscience behind what we just experienced. And that is that I don't know if any of you have followed Daniel Kahneman. He is just an incredible scientist and behavioral scientist, and has studied this effect, which is that we think fast and slow. We are organized by fight or flight, and so we make initial impulsive reactions in order to bypass unconscious bias, which, by the way, is very hard to do because it's based on your personal experience in life. You must interrupt that fast signal, that immediate interpretation of thought, and you must interject this slow method of thinking in order to make that happen. That's the neuroscience behind it. Now, what has happened in tech, because people are unable to interrupt that impulse, is that there are only 31% of women in tech, even though there are 56% graduating from technically related fields in STEM. And by the way, there are 3% of people of color in tech, when that does not in any way accurately reflect the percentages of people of color coming out of institutions. So I'm going to share with you that, that maybe not 90%, but something above the 10% of what you see here. So I'm going to go all the way back to childhood very briefly. When I was in middle school, I had my first experience of exclusion. And what I'm going to tell you is not going to sound, very different from what some of you have experienced, because middle school is an awful place for most people. What happened was I was going merrily along in my little childhood life, and my little clique of friends came up to me one day and said, "You're out." I said, "What?" They said, "You're out. O-U-T, out." With no explanation, no nothing. So I went home, and I was crying pretty hysterically. And my dad came up to me and he said, "What's wrong?" And there's no way I was going to tell my dad, because my dad had this image of me that I was a rock star, right? I'm super smart, I'm this and that. And there's no way I was going to tell him. But eventually I gave in and I said, "Dad, my friends don't want to be friends with me anymore." And he looked at me and he put his hands on each side of my face, looked right at me, staring, and said, "Denise, anyone who doesn't like you is not worth knowing." Now, for whatever reason, whether it's I needed to believe that at the moment, who knows, I took what he said so seriously, to the point that from that point on, I literally didn't care if people didn't like me. I assumed that they were not worth knowing. Now that's, in an extreme sense, that's a little dangerous, right? Because we kind of call that narcissism. So, it had to be tempered a little bit, but that ignorance got me a long way, because it taught me that the sky is the limit. It taught me not to create my own limitations until I found myself in the midst of a divorce with young children. And I had taken off 10 years from my law practice to raise them. Now I will say, this is gonna sound like a little bit like I'm patting myself on the back, but there's a reason for it. As was alluded to, I tried and won the first class action under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I, at the age of 29, was named one of the top 20 attorneys in the United States, right? So when my husband made the argument to the court that I was gonna have to go back to work, and I was explaining to the judge that I'm not admitted to practice law in the state of California, my husband, now ex-husband, said, get a job as a legal secretary. Get a job at Target. You're an able-bodied woman, you need to get a job. And I thought, maybe instead I'll build a business. I had a cross-cultural model that I thought was gonna be a book someday in retirement, and instead it became the basis for this business that I started. Great story, right? Except that what I found was that I was not invited to the included table for the Best Mom Award, right? Because I was missing a soccer game here and there, because I had to travel, because I was late for my children's play from time to time. So I was clearly not the quintessential mom. And I was also not really the quintessential thought leader or executive either. Why? For the same reason. Sometimes I had to pass on things because my kids were sick. And eventually I realized, you know what, Denise, this is self-imposed exclusion, because you can listen to these narratives or you can move on. And I did. I moved on, and I worked 24/7, and I built that business, and I sold it to Ernst Young, a 300,000 person global organization. Now, it would be great if the story stopped there, because then here's the headline. Single mom builds business, sells it to one of the largest companies in the world, becomes a senior partner in that firm. Wow! Where's no applause? Nothing? All right, but what happened when I got there? Now, when I accepted the position, by the way, this is not a criticism of Ernst Young. Ernst Young is a phenomenal institution that does miraculous and wonderful things for their client, okay? But it is a great metaphor for what happens in enterprise. Because the reason why I accepted this particular acquisition, and there was a bidding war, was because I asked on the last interview, I said, why do you want me? And they said, because you're a thought leader and a disruptor. And I lit up. I was like, they know me, and I'm gonna thrive here. But when I got there, what I was really fascinated by was not what was happening, but what was not happening. So what was not happening is I wasn't being invited to critical meetings. I wasn't being introduced to critical clients. I wasn't being invited to important conference calls or meetings. The silence was actually quite deafening. And this time, the consequences were a lot higher to both the company and to me than it was in middle school. Because this was the opportunity of a lifetime for me. I got to go to Kerala, India, to an innovation center and lead a team of 40 PhDs who were extracting the methodology from my brain as if there was a USB that was inserted in my ear. It was like being on the moon. The fact that day by day I felt like the best part of me was dying was a problem for me that could be solved by finishing my earnout and by starting my third rodeo in terms of my third business. But it's not a problem that could be solved by Ernst Young, because you know what? There was a tremendous economic investment there, right? They didn't buy my business for peanuts, and I wasn't being paid peanuts. And there is a tremendous economic loss for companies who want these disruptors and cannot assimilate them through an inclusive environment. So, what can we do better in tech? First of all, we can, in terms of investment decisions. So, I'm going to sort of dissect my comments a little bit. These comments are related to investors. In terms of investors, we can make decisions based not on the 10% of what we see, but on the 90% that we don't see. And we can establish due diligence associated with that so that we get the answers, so that we can say yes to these people. We can let go of the assumption that women in particular will not be in it for the long haul. Ask the difficult question. If you see a woman that's childbearing age, don't ask them, are you going to have kids or anything that's illegal? But you can say, listen, if we invest in you, we need to know that you're in it for the long haul. Are you? And assess that woman, put her to the task, and let her answer to the question without these assumptions that you're making in your head that are keeping your purse strings closed. Recruit a diverse slate of people, of decision makers that are going to make these decisions. If all the people that are making these decisions are white men, what kind of people do you think they're going to invest in? We all surround ourselves with people who look like us and act like us. It's human nature. You can bypass that by creating a diverse slate of decision makers. So let me speak now a little bit more to companies, and I will say I have alluded to inclusive leadership behaviors, and I have not told you what they are, so I'm going to make it really simple. We call them the 3 R's. And if you remember these 3 R's, you will solve about 50%, if not more, of leadership behaviors. We coach leaders to be receptive, reflective, and revitalizing. I get it. It's a 3 R's acronym so that you can remember it. But here's what they mean. Receptive means not only being accepting of diverse ideation and diverse people, but curious about them. Ask them about their families. Ask them about how they think. Reflective. Be reflective of your own bias. If you're walking down the street and you freeze up when you see a young black male, that means you have some associations with young black men. So you better interrupt that signal and see that person for who they really are. If you see a woman up on a stage and she's being really assertive, don't make the assumption that she's some sort of arrogant witch. Make the assumption that she's an assertive female leader who knows what she's talking about. If you're concerned about your diverse workforce, whether it's women or people of color or anyone else, ask. Put out a pulse survey. Find out how these people are feeling in the workplace. If you're really concerned about doing the right thing, end mandatory arbitration and mandatory confidentiality agreements that force people to make decisions like settling without having a voice when there is sexual harassment or real insidious discrimination that is blocking an individual's ability to be successful. Institute useful training, not this liability prevention stuff that might maybe help a leader not to make a really silly mistake, but that will never turn he or she into an inclusive leader. And enforce a zero tolerance mentality towards sexual harassment and any kind of discrimination in the workplace. What women can do better. Now this is tough, okay, because if I was, some senior leader in Apple, there'd be like some, and I'll definitely get to you in a second. There would be some, reporter here that would go and say to me, Denise, spoke about women and she's making it the woman's problem and she's, victimizing the victim. That is not what I'm saying. I am saying that if you are a woman in the audience, and I think that this applies nicely also to anyone who feels that they're different, Don't put off to tomorrow what you can do today. If you actually feel like you have thought leadership, raise your hand and get it done. Don't marginalize your time off. If you're going to take time off with your kids, own it. Keep in touch with the workforce, speak or publish or do something to keep your credentials alive. And if what you're doing, for example, I ran into the other day a woman who took time off from her investment banking position to raise her kids and was running her husband's entire medical practice. And she introduces herself as I said, "Oh, do I know you?" She said, "Oh, well, I'm Dr. So-and-so's wife." I said, "Oh, okay." I said, so what are you doing now?" "Oh, I'm not doing anything. I'm not working right now. I'm home with the kids." I'm like, "Oh, really? Are you home with them, full time?" "Well, no, I'm running my husband's office. I do all the invoicing. I do any patient complaints. I do all the marketing and all the PR." I said, "Oh, really? Why are you introducing yourself as Dr. So-and-so's wife? And why are you marginalizing the fact that you're able to do not one job, but two jobs? Why do we do this to ourselves?" I don't know, I'm sorry guys, but the last time I looked into it, we are the only ones who can biologically reproduce. And so there are these things called children and families and generations, and we're responsible for that. We can't delegate that to someone else. And what we're doing, if we're doing it right, takes an incredible amount of energy and skill that we are not trained for. And if we are also doing something else, anything else, that's a big deal. You had a question. Oh my goodness, did I leave that out? Yes, I did. Okay, the third one, revitalizing, thank you for keeping me honest, has to do with some of the typical characteristics that you associate with a leader. If any of you in the audience like Gandhi or Martin Luther King or John F. Kennedy, you like them for a lot of reasons. But you also like them because they're charismatic, because they empower other people, because they give us strength. So if I have people on my team that are diverse and they come to me with an idea and they say, "I'm thinking that maybe we could change the entire operations here by doing this and that. We'll report this to this and then we can put this operation in place." And I say, "I'm not sure what the business case is for that." Or I say, "Oh, that's a good idea, but," and then I add something else. Or I do anything other than say, "I am so glad that you came to me with that. It's wonderful that you have this on your mind and that you're constantly looking for optimization. What can I do to support that kind of experimentation?" And then when he or she experiments and fails, if that happens, patting that person on the back and said, "Good for you that you took that idea through to execution. What did we learn from this? And what do you need from me in the future to be even more successful than you were this time?" That's revitalizing. Thank you. So, what can men do better? Now, did you think you were going to get off the hook? Okay. So, with regard to women, and by the way, the reason why I have that up there is I'm doing a little crowdsourcing. So what we learned, for example, we were going to call this book "Teach Me to Golf" as a metaphor for what women need to ask for and men need to do to help. And we learned that champions for change, making them both champions makes a lot more sense. Now, the second thing that we've learned is, why do you have the woman up front and the guys in the background? It should be two people on the same plane, playing golf together. So if there are any more learning lessons before this goes to print, please tell me. I would really appreciate it. You probably saved me a lot of aggravation. But the basic gist is this. We, as women, need male champions. And by the way, if you don't stand up for your female client, I hate to say it, and I don't mean to make you feel uncomfortable, but you're part of the problem, because silence hurts. If there's some sort of insidious female joke and you don't, say something, it could be minor, it could be like, "Come on guys, that's not cool." Or, I don't know, maybe you roll your eyes and walk away. It doesn't have to be anything major. but stand up. If you see a woman getting interrupted at a meeting, and I will tell you statistically, and I'll bet most of you don't know this, women get interrupted 8 to 10 times more than men. So if all you do when a woman gets interrupted at a meeting is say, excuse me, Joe, just one second, I just want to hear what Denise has to say. Can you finish your thought, Denise? You're already a male champion. If you get called to do a speaking engagement, ask about the gender parity on that panel. Ask about the racial diversity. Tell them that you're committed to diversity. And if the answer is no, they're all white males, let's just say, then say, you know what, I'm going to pass for now, but however, I have a great colleague that I'm going to refer to you, because I think your audience is really going to appreciate having people from diverse perspectives. And by the way, there's an entire movement in Australia called, I think it's called Male Champions or something to that effect, where these men from significant institutions are taking a pledge that they will do just what I described to you. If you're a leader, demand a diverse slate. This whole concept of referrals, of, oh, we have a position open, I know so-and-so that I play golf with. Boy, he's just incredible. He's gotten such good metrics, such good numbers. That's the kind of thing that perpetuates a non-diverse senior leadership role. So I'm going to do one last exercise to close, if you don't mind, okay? I'd like you to all stand up. You're not going to like this, but could you stand up anyway? You're going to be part of a grand experiment. I am going to ask you, please, to laugh as loud and joyously and happy as you possibly can. It's only going to be for a few seconds, and then I'm going to say, cut. You ready? Awesome, awesome. Okay, now I'm going to ask you to sing, and I'm going to get you started, right? With a good old American song. Bye, bye, Miss American Pie. Drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry. Okay, cut. That wasn't too bad, was it? All right, now I'm going to ask you to dance. We're going to do that same song, but you're going to dance at the same time. You ready? All right. Bye, bye, Miss American Pie. Drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry. Okay, all right. Now, I'm going to ask you to strike a pose that says, I know what I'm doing, guys. Don't mess with me. Okay, you can sit down. How'd you guys feel about this? How'd you feel about laughing? Let's start with that. How'd you feel about laughing like a hyena in front of everybody? Anybody feel good? Nice. Anybody feel uncomfortable? Okay. And what about the singing? That's even more vulnerability there, right? Who the heck wants to sing? Do you think I wanted to sing into this microphone? Okay, I'm not Madonna. How many of you like doing that? Okay, a few. And how many felt like a complete idiot? All right, and what about the dancing? Now we're going to add in even further, vulnerability. Anybody have a good time doing that? You look like you were having a good time doing that. Anybody else? A couple of people. And the rest of you felt maybe a tiny bit weird doing that in front of your peers? Okay, these are the innovation gremlins, okay? When we feel judged, when we feel like we look stupid, we cannot create. Now there's another lesson beyond that. How many of you felt like you could create and share your diverse ideation while you were standing here like this? Any of you feel, the impulse to just share the the next new idea that you have in your brain with other people? We are all responsible for not allowing ourselves to indulge in feeling judged or stupid. And we are all responsible as institutions for not judging or belittling others for their ideas. So I'm going to open the mic up for any questions or comments, and I thank you for having me today. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to come down to the audience with the mic. We probably only have a few minutes, but is there anyone that would like to share what it's like to be a diverse person when it comes to being an inventor, a student, someone in the workplace? Yes?
I actually have a question. Is that
sure.
okay?
Yeah, use this.
So my question is, I really liked your tips for what women can do better. I wonder if you have any suggestions for when you come up against someone kind of one-on-one who isn't supportive of inclusion, be that men or other women.
Yep. So that's the best question ever, because here's what happens. You have certain legal protections. So for example, in California, guess what? You can't ask anyone, let alone a woman, what you got paid in your last job. And the reason for that is the Equal Pay Act, an amendment to the Equal Pay Act. The reason for that is that we are typically way below our male counterparts, and they're trying to eliminate that. Now, I want you to imagine yourself at an interview, and someone says to you, how much did you earn in your last position? And you know in the back of your head, they can't ask that question. We're in California, for goodness sakes. And how far do you think you're going to get when you say, oh, you know what, that question is illegal. I'm not going to answer that. What are the odds of getting that job? Right? But we're not educating women as to what they should do in those circumstances, as you just pointed out. So, for example, I would say to the woman, oh, I understand there's a salary range for this position, and I just want you to know this is my job. I really feel like this is what I want to do. I am very happy negotiating within the range of the parameters that you've decided on. Circumvented, right? What about, and I'm going to share with you a personal story. I was in the elevator with a colleague. It was a long time ago. And we're in a hotel because we had to speak the next day before a whole group of important clients. And he had been trying to get me to have a drink with him all night, and I didn't want to because I wanted to be on my game the next day. And we're going up in the elevator, and he's talking about how dynamic he is, and then he goes, and you should see how dynamic I am in bed. I was so upset that whole night I couldn't sleep. I was totally rattled the next day. I came home and I'm telling my two, teenage boys, don't you ever behave like this, and you have no idea what your mom went through. And my son looked at me, 14 years old, and he said, Mom, you're part of the problem. I said, what? He said, yeah, why? What did you do? When he said that, I said, I just kind of went, and got out of the elevator. He goes, well, what kind of message do you think he sent? You sent to him? Do you think that you discouraged him from doing that again? And what happens if that person now, you're in your 40s, and what happens to the woman who's in her 20s who doesn't have, the tools that you have? And I'm like, oh, you don't understand. I mean, he's a more senior partner than I am, and you just don't get business. He said, well, I'm not saying for you to, create a problem. I'm saying you just say, oh, you know what? I know you probably meant that in the best possible way, but it kind of makes me feel a little uncomfortable. So maybe let's stick to business. Okay? Nothing major. You're not trying to set up barriers and rifts. You're just trying to let people know that it's not okay. And then the third thing that I'll say is, there is no reason short of having a health issue with your child, postpartum depression, or other things that you're dealing with. But in the perfect case scenario, let's just say, there's no reason to ever have a gap in your resume. I took 10 years off. You will not see in my resume 1 year off, because I made myself Denise L. Hummel and Associates. I continued to publish during that time when the kids were asleep, you know, short articles, no big deal. I spoke from time to time because it's called a babysitter, okay? If you are a professional woman, you don't need to have gaps on your resume and trail behind men when you get back. Any other questions? I think we probably should take one more, because I'm guessing that timing-wise we only have time for one more question or statement. Anybody? Yes, sir.
It was just interesting question we had from corporate America. I don't think I would ever think that. Like the way you're brought up as a man, especially coming from sports, is that somebody is a roadblock. My first thought is, how do I beat this person? How do I destroy this person? Like, it's just such a different mentality. So I don't think I would ever, listening to you say that, it's like, oh wow, people do see things a lot differently. So.
And we're taught the opposite. We're socialized that we collaborate, we take care of people, right? So I do have one question for you before we close, because you are a black professional. Did what I say about the jogging through the park thing offend you?
It didn't. And I thought about it, and I was like, so true that you had that thought, because I always laugh. I'll be with my wife, and all of our paperwork, everything. We're in the car. We're not worrying about it. We drive. The cops are driving slow. Keep going. We have insurance. We have everything. But it would be, when I was younger, that wasn't the thought process. Mm-hmm. It was like, drive slower so they don't pull you over, and it's just different thought process where you are in life and how I'm dressed. I know when I'm dressed like this, I'm going to have less issues anywhere I go.
Right.
Than if I had, how I came in earlier, I had sweats and a t-shirt, and the cleaning crew was like, oh, what a difference a minute makes if I wouldn't change. And I'm like, yeah.
Right. So, no, the reason why I asked you that is just so you know, I took a risk, right? Because I took a big risk when I did that. And the reason why I did it is we have to have difficult conversations. We cannot avoid these discussions. We have to be respectful, and I don't know if it came off this way, but I was trying to be empathetic. My aha moment was, Denise, you get a privilege. You can spill something on you, and somebody's not gonna assume something else. And that was a great aha moment for me. And if we're able to have these conversations and take a little bit of risk, so that we can understand each other, like it was a risk to ask you that question. You could have, in front of all these people, said, yeah, Denise, where do you get off, right? I mean, I'm glad that wasn't the reaction. But if I don't reach a little bit, then we're keeping all these conversations underground. Anyway, thank you so much.